Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so you can learn and I can learn better as well. In this video, I'm going to talk about Dynamo Flex, which has been talked about, but I believe that a lot of people have been interpreting Dynamo Flex in the incorrect way. For example, TFT Academy has it listed as MF Dynamo Flex, and really that kind of leads you to believe that this is an AD line possibly. But a lot of my understanding after a coaching session with Marcel, who is currently ranked 4 NA, is that this line is very much an AP flex line, which leans into MF later, but is really strong primarily because of your ability to play around Elise, which also lets you kind of flex between strat amp, Vex, and brand as well. So in this video, I'm going to do a deep dive into Dynamo Flex, why it's good, what the board looks like, augments, how to itemize, and an example where in the mid game, I was playing around Elise and I had tunnel visioned a little bit too hard on strat amp. It was contested and I did not see the Dynamo line that was available to me because in my mental model for Dynamo, it was, oh, I should be playing around MF in the mid game. And Marcel really helped me understand how Dynamo Flex works a lot more, why it's good. And specifically, it's good because Elise, the core idea behind why this comp is good is because Elise you should view as a 4 cost. If you look at the stats here, and I filtered by 3 and 4 cost at challenger level, Elise has a higher AVP than all the 3 and 4 costs. And so if we view Elise as a 4 cost, that really makes it more clear why this line is so good, specifically because you can roll fairly minimally at level 7 or level 8 and be quite stable to go fast 9, more cost effectively than pretty much every other board and comp out there, and then be able to cap around 5 costs. But it's also super flexible. And so before I dive into this comp in detail, I'm going to first go through the meta mindset of the day, which is, should you commit or stay flexible? And this is a psychological, philosophical segment that should help you get better about navigating this specific line, but is also useful to help you improve your TFT gameplay as a whole. And I try to extend it to just how it can be valuable and applicable to your life in general. So if you want to skip straight to the Dynamo Flex breakdown, take a look at the timestamp in the description below. All right, so meta mindset of the day. This was inspired by a viewer comment, Akiro, who said that I've had a hard time pivoting into other comps, especially when I'm contested. I tend to commit to my comp and then go bot 4. So that person suggested that I do a meta mindset on commitment. And so that's what we're going to do here. So as far as TFT specifically goes, how much you should commit and stay flexible really depends on the meta. And right now, Elise really makes it far more flexible in the mid game, especially when you could play around 2 or 3 costs that allow you to kind of flex multiple lines at the 4 cost level. Given how strong Elise is, this makes flexibility far more of a viable option. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you keep things too flexible, because when you are always exploring all the options and never committing, you are likely wasting resources. You are maybe selecting augments that are not optimized for the specific line or few lines, or maybe 1 or 2 lines that you might want to go down. Your itemization may be too flexible and not optimized. So a big part of this is understanding how much flexibility you have, how your kind of line options narrow as you make more and more decisions, when you should commit, what is the benefit of committing, and from the commitment point, then you can fully focus on executing your game plan. So I'm going to talk about kind of some of the theory behind committing, the challenge around committing, which is definitely true for life with the amount of optionality that exists today. This is especially true if you're maybe doing some online dating. The benefits of commitment, how commitment relates to choice and decision making, when to commit, and then how to commit. So here's a quote on commitment by Sylvia Plath, who said, "I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one they plopped to the ground at my feet." So this quote is kind of a metaphor for when we keep too many options open and we don't commit, it basically causes all of the options to go stale and eliminates all of the options. And so by not choosing, you are making a choice. And that is for sure true in TFT and definitely true in life. When we do not allow ourselves to commit down one path, whether that's choosing a line or choosing someone to commit to in a relationship, choosing a career to commit to, we kind of just allow life to pass us by. We allow the people in our lives to pass us by. And this is a very human, common challenge that we all face, especially in the world that we live in today, where especially with the internet, the connectivity of the world, where we have social media offering, like Instagram, showing a lot of people's kind of best 1% perception. People are tailoring how they look, constantly putting a front so that you don't really see who someone is, how they think, how they feel underneath. And so for many people, you just assume that someone's best is just what you should expect without understanding all the kind of commitment that they had to do to get to that point, the pain, hard work, suffering that they had to endure. And this is kind of the challenge of our time with so many options available to us. And yet the benefits of commitment, there's research done on this is more so related to performance. When a research group that had like kind of a long-term commitment of around a goal versus a group that did not commit and were more like on the fly trying to figure out where they were going. The long-term commitment group with less practice actually performed better longer term than the short-term commitment group who practiced for an hour and a half. So the conclusion here is that when you commit to something long-term and you combine it with high levels of practice, your skills skyrocket and you will have a far higher likelihood of performing well and accomplishing your goals than someone who maybe was willing to put in the time but didn't have your same level of commitment. This is definitely relevant, for example, with TFT. If you have a long-term commitment to get better at the game of TFT and you set aside regular time to practice, it will likely mean that you will perform better than if you are kind of not sure where you want to be and still putting in just as much time or more time. That level of kind of commitment focuses your brain to say something is important, which allows you to both approach your research and practice process with more deliberateness, asking the right questions, and then being able to retain the information better than if you were kind of going with the kind of on the fly trying to figure it out. Goethe said, "Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it." So similarly, whenever you have this commitment or dream goals of where you want to go, when you commit, you begin trying to pursue that dream, there is some type of power or magic behind that. And that is kind of what science has shown, but what Goethe was kind of a great literary genius in a way. From an emotional standpoint, he was an author from, I think, over 100, 200 years ago, I forget. But he really identified that when you have that commitment and dream, it makes your action and time commitment far more powerful and effective. Derek Sivers says, you make it the best through your commitment to it. Your dedication and actions make any choice great. You can stop seeking the best option. Pick one and irreversibly commit. Then it becomes the best choice for you. This is definitely relevant in the context of, for example, relationships. I know many of my friends and peers who, especially earlier on, maybe in their 20s and even early 30s, are very afraid of commitment to a partner. There's always this anxiety around, oh, am I picking the right person? Like, yeah, they have these positive things and I do really like them, but then they have these other things that I'm not a huge fan of. And the ideal person would have all of this, right? Like, and they have like a laundry list of like 20 different things that the ideal person would want. And part of that to me is that maybe they haven't really figured out what's truly important to them. Like, narrow that down to like really core things, because it's going to be almost impossible to find somebody that has exactly your whatever 20 ideal characteristics without the downside of any huge issues. A, like whether that person exists in the first place, and then B, whether they think that you have this whatever their 20 things are and match exactly without the downsides that, you know, would push them away, and that you would actually have the opportunity to meet and click and be in the right place at the right time together. Like, it seems like the odds of that are extremely low. And to me, it's a relationship is much more about commitment. It's about identifying similar values, core values. It's not like the nice to have. It's really figuring out what do you really need in your partner. Like, really narrow that down. What are the kind of core values that you have that you want someone else to align with, and then the rest of it you can figure it out. My wife and I have had disagreements about plenty of things over the years, and we accept that that's okay. But the core things that we really care about, like, we are in alignment on. And that is what allows us to move forward, to have trust and faith in each other, and to commit to each other. And eventually, because you commit and irreversibly commit, then it becomes the best choice for you. And this is definitely true for TFT as well. Like, TFT is always this balance between, if you commit too early and you haven't collected enough information, for example, if you're committing in stage 1 to a reroll comp and you haven't seen what your items are, your augments are, you haven't seen if you're going to be contested, well, you know, committing that early raises problems, right? But if you commit too late, then you are also wasting lots. Like, let's say you want to play some, let's say, Elise reroll, but you want to keep all the options open. You scout and you see nobody's actually contesting you for Elise reroll, but you're like, oh, I want to maybe still play Strat Amp, and I still maybe want to play Brand, and I still maybe want to play Vex, and you're holding like a million different units on your bench, and you're bench locked. And because you have this indecision of being unable to commit, you are essentially, you know, facing the problem of this quote here where all of your options kind of become suboptimal. The figs all go black, and one by one they plop to the ground at your feet, right? And they, like, you are actually making each of your options worse by not committing. So when, and that's the beauty of this game of TFT, is finding that sweet spot. And a lot of this is much more art than science, and a lot of instinct kind of built in around when to commit. But once you do, make that the best choice for you. And if you also think about it this more broadly from a meta standpoint, and how to even invest your time outside of the game itself to figuring out which comps you should even study, um, that also requires a certain degree of commitment, because if you are not really committing to learning any single comp well, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to climb that much. That was one of the feedback points that who was it that did the talk? Wow, I'm blanking. But he did the talk on one of the videos about line selection. He's top 10 player, and he was basically saying that he would much rather commit to a few lines and understanding them really well than be able to play a broad number of lines like less well. And that's also kind of part of my reasoning behind doing a detailed analysis behind this specific line, Dynamo Flex, because not only has Dish Soap mentioned that this is S tier, I think it's misunderstood from the way that they have set it up. And from Marcel, like, we put together kind of a high level tier list where this top level is S, this is like A, this kind of goes in between A and B, and this is kind of C or B. And Brand would probably be like kind of up here too, but like Marcel basically saying this Elise, Dynamo Flex, and Strat Amp are pretty much like the top S lines, which aligns with what Frodan and Dish Soap have listed. But this understanding this Dynamo line is very nuanced, and there's a lot of complexity and skill expression that when you commit to understanding it should help your gameplay a lot. And I think that mentality about how to approach getting better and committing to getting better at the game involves this degree of depth that most players that play this game are unwilling to commit at that level, which, if you are willing to commit at that level, should give you a huge competitive advantage. And that is for sure true at pretty much anything in life. Most people are unwilling to commit because of fear that they make the wrong choice, for fear that they might make a mistake, for fear that there's just something else better out there, right? And so this idea of commitment related to conscious choice, as opposed to letting things choose for you by not choosing, is a key idea, right? Like, and that's kind of this idea, or you're waiting for the game to let you know which line to select, but by then it's oftentimes too late, and many of the options have already gone sour. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." So there's this kind of key idea of choice. I don't let the world choose the path that I take, but rather I take life by the horns and I direct where I want to spend my energy. Rollo May, another psychologist, said, "We define freedom as the capacity to pause in the midst of stimuli from all directions, and in this pause, to throw our weight toward this response rather than that one." So toward this response rather than that one. So there's a choice between, there's all this stimulus, there's all these in TFT lines and options available to you. And the ability, freedom, he defines as the ability to pause for a moment and to consciously throw your weight towards one line versus another line, right? And that is your freedom. That is your conscious choice, what you can choose to become. And that's for sure true in your life. There are so many people in the world that I suspect say that fate leads them somewhere, or that I didn't really have a choice, whether that's the career you choose, the friends that you surround yourself with, the partner that you end up with. Many people kind of take the safe path, or just go in the direction that the current's kind of sweeping you in, or the wind kind of blows you. And yes, there are certain things that are outside of your control, but that there are also many things that are fully within your control. And again, finding that right balance is challenging, but can also be extremely rewarding. So part of the question is, when do you commit? And this is actually a kind of computer science and math problem around, it's called a stopping problem. Like, when do you stop and when do you make a choice? And so in the book Algorithms to Live By, which is taking computer science mathematical concepts and applying it to life, Brian and Tom say, in any optimal stopping problem, the crucial dilemma is not which option to pick, but how many options to even consider. So let's say you are going apartment hunting, or the original problem was posed as a hiring problem. If you're trying to hire a secretary, how many secretaries do you interview before you actually pick one? And from a mathematical proof standpoint, what was found that is, if you want the best odds of making the best decision, spend 37% of your search non-committally exploring options. So that means you are gonna look for, let's say you're gonna spend 10 days apartment hunting, then you're gonna spend about 3.5 days searching for apartments without actually committing to one. Or if you're gonna interview 20 different secretaries, you're going to first interview 40%, so was that 8 secretaries or so, before extending any offers. If you are thinking about doing online dating and it's maybe your first time out in the market in a while, you might say like, well, I want to spend like a month kind of searching, right? Then maybe you're spending the first 10 to 12 days just doing dating without actually doing a second date. You're not going to commit yet, right? And the idea is that you're calibrating during that period. And then after you hit that 37% mark, you are prepared to immediately commit, deposit and all, whether that's giving an offer to a candidate, depositing for the next best apartment that you find, saying, I'm going to go on a second date with you and I'm going to like be like not official, but exclusive with you. You're going to basically commit to the very first place you see that beats whatever you've already seen. This is not merely an intuitively satisfying compromise between looking and leaping. It is the provably optimal solution. And so you can also extend this idea to TFT. When we think about you're maybe flexing between a few different options in stage 3, maybe even stage 4. One way you can think about this is like, when is the ideal point that you want to commit by? And up until that point, you are kind of considering what your top options are. So there's actually a game I was playing where, and I'll go into more detail about this game once we go through the least detailed analysis. But in this phase, I was considering, my original game plan was actually strat amp. But from this spot, I can also play Dynamo, I can play Brand, I can play Vex. And there's definitely pros and cons to each of those options. But part of it is, when do you want to commit by? 37%. So you can even think about how long does the average game last, right? By the end of the game, you will have wanted to commit far earlier. And so a third of a game might be at around stage 3, end of stage 3. So you really want to make sure you commit by, right? Or you can even think about this if you're flexing a stage 4 roll down and you're rolling down 50 gold, then you might say by the time you've rolled down around a little less than half of that, so let's say around 20 gold or so, like, you should commit at that point, right? And this allows you, and at that point, you're kind of selecting the line that beats whatever you've already seen. The best line that, given the current situation, allows you to commit and deploy all your resources to it. All right, and then how would you commit? Mark Twain said, "The secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret of getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks, and then starting on the first one. So part of the problem when committing as well is that because there's so many choices, so many options, we might procrastinate and delay the commitment. Even if maybe we mentally say like, oh, I should commit, we're afraid to almost. And so Mark Twain's basically saying, yeah, it's super complicated and overwhelming sometimes. And the secret to getting started on that is to break it down into small tasks and then just get started on the first one. So, for example, down here, if I were to say I were going to select a line and commit, the first thing I could do, instead of saying like, oh my gosh, like I'm just gonna still keep it flexible, like there's just too many options here. If I'm really gonna commit, let's say to Street Demon, then I could just sell everything that's not Street Demon. Like that's one way that I could break it down, right? And then I'm saying, okay, what do I want to do next? Well, I'm gonna have a bunch of gold. I need to find 7 Street Demon. Who are the missing units? And kind of go from there, right? Peter Block said, the most common rationalization for doing things we do not believe in is that what we really desire either takes too long or costs too much. And so the idea is that we oftentimes do not commit to what we believe in because we think it's going to take too long or it's going to cost too much. Instead, he says, instead of saying how long will it take or how much does it cost, he says, ask the question, what commitment am I willing to make? Because when you frame it in the sense of how much do I care about this, what's truly important to me, and how much am I willing to commit to it, then the how long, how expensive, how much energy, how much time, these answers kind of flow from that point of the commitment that you're willing to make. All right, so that's the meta mindset of the day. Should you commit or stay flexible? I would love to hear your thoughts on how these ideas relate to your life, to TFT. And if you have other suggestions on meta mindset topics that you'd like to cover, definitely leave me a note in the comments below. Okay, so let's dive into Dynamo Flex. So I talked about how Elise, from a kind of mental model standpoint, we should start viewing it as a forecast. And that's also why a lot of times I've seen, I think it was YBY1 in a game that I was VOD reviewing where he had a Kog'Maw 2 and he instead decided to play an Elise 1 over the Cog 2 to kind of tempo early game. And if we view Elise as a forecast, that kind of explains that, right? When we look at these stats, Elise shows up higher than pretty much, she does show up higher than every other forecast. We can see why. And if we even look at 4 Dynamo, Elise 2 with 3 items, averages a 4.3, we can see that that's also kind of related to this idea. So why should we play Dynamo Flex? Well, the front line is extremely flexible. I'm going to go through pretty much all of these are different variants that you can play at level 8. This is the default variant. We can play a 4 Vanguard front line, which is similar to 4 Vanguard, 4 Marksman. We can play a Bruiser front line. We can even play an Exo front line. There's so many options, or a Nitro front line. And so that allows you, especially if, for example, Vanguard Marksman is very contested in a lobby, then you don't need to play the default line, right? You don't, well, I guess this isn't really covered in the default line. Then you can avoid playing this Vanguard line. Or if someone else is for some reason playing TF reroll, then you don't need to play the Braum line. You could play a different frontline line, right? So in that situation, being able to scout and seeing what, or if someone's playing Anima Squad, then you can also avoid this line, right? But scouting becomes extremely important to help you understand what front line you want to angle toward. Another benefit of this line is that your itemization is extremely flexible. It's not like Vex or Strat Amp where you want to have blue buff specifically or Shojin specifically. They're pretty much interchangeable. And you can even build Elise with no mana gen at all if you have 4 Dynamo. That's also possible. And then furthermore, you can build both AD and AP items because you are playing around MF in the mid game. But the distinction between how I interpret this, the optimal way of playing this line versus like what TFT Academy has here, is that you really are primarily playing around Elise as your target and not so much MF. Like I would not title this MF Dynamo Flex. It's much more Elise Dynamo Flex. And then lastly, you can easily pivot into many AP meta comps, Strat Amp, Vexotech, specifically these Exotech items where Hyperfangs is better than Hollowbow, Chas is better than Lantern, and Street Demon Brand as well. So early game, it's extremely flexible. You pretty much just pick up the Dynamo units and you can flex any front line you want. And then from these different front lines, you can angle towards the different, like if you are already in Bruiser and you're building around Gragas and Mordekaiser in the mid game, then you can just default towards these Bruiser front line, right? So it allows you to kind of more naturally transition into the mid game, which allows you to really save a lot of gold, especially if you hit an Elise out of an orb. You can very easily streak early and mid game and just be super cost effective while being healthy, and then put you in a spot that you can get to level 9 far more cost effectively than everyone else around you, and then be able to convert that into a high cap with 5 costs in the late game, which ideally you can cap around this board. And especially if you can convert that extra gold into a bunch of Zac blobs, you can hit your, like there's 4 or 5 costs here, right? Not to mention that this Elise is basically like a 4 cost. If you have a lot of items, you last into the late game, you get a bunch of Zac blobs, you're throwing in an extra unit with Aurora, this board caps extremely high. And Aurora was actually buffed in the last patch as well, which is also why this, this patch, which is why this comp is so strong as well. At level 7, this is kind of the more natural way to go into this line, which is you can stick around here at level 7 and reroll Elise and Braum. Once you find MF, then that usually grows in over Gragas. And usually you won't stick around and roll here at level 7 unless you were lost streaking. Another benefit of this line is that you can play from ahead or from behind. Like you can lost streak into this. You don't have to lost streak like, for example, Strat Amp or Vex. You don't have to have those tiers. 1 tier is enough. Even if you have 0 tiers, you can play this line because Dynamo already generates mana anyway. And so like usually you don't roll at level 7 unless you're lose streaking. Then you can at 3-5 push to 7, roll for 2 stars of these, and then kind of sit for a little bit. But even if you want to roll for at least 3 Braum 3, you usually want to push 8 because that board is extremely stable. You want to play around 4 Dynamo, a solid frontline, and gives you higher odds of hitting Aurora. So at level 8, this is the standard board. You have 4 Dynamo in your backline, and then you want 3 Syndicate. Typically, you want to hat MF if you have 80 items on her and you have MF2. If she is a legit secondary carry threat, then you typically want to hat her for more damage. But if you are primarily itemizing Elise and Braum and you don't have any 80 items yet, maybe you don't have an MF2, even if she's an MF2 but just carrying no items, you typically want to hat the Braum. So it really depends on the scenario. And if you are playing the reroll line, let's say you have very good Braum items, Stoneplate Warmog, or you have a Braum 3, then you definitely want to hat the Braum. And in that case, you prefer the ideal BIS for Elise would be Blue Buff Gunblade Archangel, because you're playing a very scaled fight where you are gaining a lot of AP with Archangel and then healing your Braum back up. So yeah, I would say most of the time you're probably going to play this line to just fast 9 because Elise is so powerful in stage 4. You can kind of just sit and then push tempo. But if you happen to hit a lot of copies of Elise and Braum by the time you get to 8, then you can sit and roll. Of course, in that situation, you definitely want to make sure you're scouting the lobby to see how contested those units are. All right, so that's this line here. If, for example, you don't hit an MF, then the Syndicate hat is less important. And let's say instead of hitting MF, you high roll an Aurora but no MF, and maybe you find a Leona on your roll down as well. In that case, playing this 4 Vanguard variant makes a lot more sense. Braum is flexible between any other Vanguard you could throw in. J4, you can throw in Skarner. Especially if you get Aurora, this line is quite good because you can get the 3 Vanguard in. Of course, Leona, Silas, Aurora are going to be contested by your Vanguard marksman. So this line is definitely going to be usually more contested than this line, but probably this front line is going to be better, especially if you are not playing around MF, then the hat is less valuable. Like you'd rather have if you could choose between a Braum 2 and a Leona 2, you'd probably rather have a Leona 2. So next we have Bruiser. This line, Marcel made the point that it's much better with Kobuko than if you're playing a random Alistar or something, unless you hit Cho 2. But usually, again, a huge benefit of playing Elise is that you can stabilize typically around an Elise 2 and like in this case, a Braum 2, Elise 2, usually you're quite stable. Like maybe you take some losses, but they're actually typically good losses, which allows you to go 9. And if you have a Leona 2, Elise 2, you can oftentimes full streak the stage. So basically, if you're thinking about when do I stop rolling, if you view Elise as a 4 cost, that kind of is helpful to indicate how strong you are. For example, if you're playing Vanguard Marksman, you hit a Leona 2 and you hit a Xayah 2, if this was a Xayah, like if you just replace the Dynamos with Marksman, usually you would think like, okay, I'm pretty strong now with a Leona 2 and a Xayah 2, right? But with the Bruiser frontline, it's a little weaker because if you don't have the Kobuko and you don't have Cho 2, this is not as strong of a frontline. But if you hit a Kobuko, that CC gives you a lot more time, and if you hit a Cho 2, then you're actually quite strong. And in the case that you don't have a Kobuko or a Cho 2, but let's say you have a Mordekaiser 2, which is the scenario I found myself in here, then playing around Exotech actually makes a lot of sense, especially if you have if your 3 Exotech is a tank item, then you can play around Mord 2 as your main tank, throw in Sejuani and Jax, and you're good to go. And one thing you note about this comp here is that this is basically equivalent to Exotech. If you swap out Elise and MF for Varus and Vex, like this is the Vexotech board essentially. And in this case, this is Jhin instead of Aurora. So if you're doing your roll down, you already have a blue buff on Elise. Maybe you're contested MF and you already had that blue buff. You already had Mordekaiser too. Then you could easily pivot into Vexotech from this spot. And then finally, Nitro. This is far more conditional on having your Nitro units in early, but if you get Elise out of the orb, definitely consider holding on to the Nitro units because this T-Hex can scale quite well and you can just play around this core as well. At least in the early game. If you're going to play Nitro into the late game, you usually want to have hit 3-star Nitro to get this scaled a lot, but you could definitely tempo with this and then transition into a fast 9 one of these options as well, or switch into one of these other level 8 options that are going to have a typically stronger frontline. But if you happen to have the Elise out of the orb and tempo off this, you could oftentimes, because Nitro is extremely strong early game because you have the extra unit, you can oftentimes full streak through end of stage 3 with a super cheap board. All right, so at level 9, if you are playing around MF and it's itemized, then one way you could go about it is to go from this board, you swap out Gragas for Kobuko, and then just throw in Zac. Very straightforward. And then you can even throw in another Zac, throw in a Urgot, throw in another Kobuko. With Aurora, if you have 1-star units, the order priority usually is going to be Kobuko because he's guaranteed to be able to CC. If you need more damage, then you can throw in Urgot, and if you need another tank, you can throw in Zac. But Zach's not going to be as good as Kobuko, especially if he doesn't have that many blobs yet. Alternatively, if you have this board, or sorry, if you have the 4 Vanguard board here, you notice your 2 out of 3 Syndicate, and if you have MF itemized, then at level 9 you just throw in Darius and you got your 3 Syndicate. So this is a super cost-effective board that if you're playing it from tempo can just give you an easy top 4 and still give you enough gold to eventually cap out with this legendary board, which is what you're trying to eventually cap with. If you happen to have unlimited resources and you're just steamrolling the lobby, this is what you eventually want to build into. If we compare this with this board here, you're basically just taking out the 3 other frontline units here, take out Syndicate, keep Gragas, Renekton, and Poppy. If you don't have Kobuko with items, then Poppy is less valuable and then you could just throw in put in Sejuani here instead. But if you do have Kobuko itemized, then Poppy would make the Cyber Boss bonus for Kobuko much stronger. And then Marcel was saying, if you are playing any of these lines here, another option at level 9, if you hit Aurora 2, is you could just actually play 2 Auroras at level 9. So you have an Aurora 2 and an Aurora 1, lets you throw in 2 units, especially if you have like another Zac, a Kobuko, whatever. Like then at level 9, you're essentially playing 11 units on your board because you have your 9 units plus Aurora. Your 2 Auroras are throwing in 2 units, and on top of that, you're getting to level 9 before everybody else. Like you're playing an 11 unit board versus other players that are playing an 8 or maybe 9 unit board, which is pretty insane. As far as augments go, gold can be very valuable since it can let you, like you're pushing levels oftentimes very cost effectively. So Fire Sale can get you more gold at level 9. Rolling for Days can let you stabilize at level 7, get that at least 2 and be extremely stable. Or at level 8, be able to stabilize much more quickly and go 9. Rig Shop gives you the out to play around Elise and Braum 3. Memory Bank, you could, if you get this, it's just an insta take and you can just hard force this line and guarantees you the Aurora. One thing for this augment is you really want to optimize on neutral rounds, like not having the fight end too quickly so that your Dynamo, like you can throw in like 2 Morganas, 2 Jins, just to like get more stacks of this going. You'll notice that there are a lot of your endgame cap. If we look at the most cap board, has 4 legendary units, MF and Elise, which you could basically view as a 4 cost. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units that can basically be carrying items. So from that perspective, dual Q, big grab bag, buried treasures are all extremely strong because you have so many units to itemize. And then calculated enhancement for your backline, this is mixed AD or AP, and because your units are already going to get a bunch of mana, getting more stats in AD or AP is extremely strong for them. Trifecta, if you are going to reroll Elise and Braum, is very strong. Piercing Lotus, because you have mixed damage between AD and AP, as well as frontline AD versus AP, Piercing Lotus is a very good all-purpose augment. Slammin' lets you get to like kind of this fast 9 spot very effectively. Shop Glitch if you're playing the reroll variant. Void Swarm, because your backline is quite strong, just having more frontline. And then expected unexpectedness, we look at the table here, can get you 4 costs right away, right? Which could let you get to Leona, MF, even Cho here. And or it could give you items. At stage 3, you could get duplicators or items. And then at stage 4, you can get 5 costs, right? So for the most part, that expected unexpectedness can give you a lot of good outcomes for this line. As far as items go, Elise is super flexible. Like you can see here that the deltas across most of her top items are like, there's not that any that like stand out heads and shoulders above the rest. Like blue buff is only slightly better than Shojin. This is a filter by 4 Dynamo, by the way. If you really want to greed best, I believe it's like blue buff, Gunblade, Archangel, if you look at the builds. But you can throw on like GS, Guardbreaker, very flexible items that could go on MF later. You can transfer these over to an Aurora 2 later. That's the beauty of this line. And then MF, you want to build damage. The Shojin builds are usually not going to be as good as the pure damage builds. Like you look at this one, Shojin, i.e. Last Whisper, or even Shojin, i.e. GS, is not going to do as well as pure damage because you already have enough mana generation for MF, and you just want her to like burst down the enemy units when she is able to cast. All right, so as an example use case, we talked about what are the different lines that you can angle towards in this case. And I talked about how you could angle this into Brand, you can angle this into Vex. One thing I didn't really mention is that Jinx is actually a great item holder for MF in the mid game. And on top of that, there's also a level 8 variant that I didn't really talk about, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think I talked about it. Let me pull it up. Oh, here. If you do not find an MF on your roll down and you have this 4 Vanguard variant, if you have hit Leona, you could just play Xayah instead of MF. And you can see here that this starts to look really close to the Vanguard Marksman. If you replace Braum with J4, and then you replace these two with Jinx and Aphelios, then you have Vanguard Marksman. But Xayah benefits from the mana gen from Dynamo, and if you have IE Last Whisper, you just throw in Xayah here. So extremely flexible line, and when you're building into it, you can also play around. If you find an early Xayah, you can use that as the item holder for MF, and you can also use Jinx as item holder. Jinx is especially useful because Jinx holds mana items very well, and so you can hold hybrid Elise and MF items with Jinx. And from this spot, you can see in this specific game, Malala was also going Dynamo Flex, and I think a lot of top challenger players are seeing this as a very good option. I think Malala in the rankings has been like doing really well lately. Where's Malala? Yeah, actually, if we filter by patch specific stats, yeah, Malala, I was looking, is insane. Plus 563 with 71%, 29%. In fact, I wonder if we look into his Elise specific stats, how that looks. Yeah, this doesn't really count, but like Nitro Flex, this is the legendary cap board here. Yeah, he's playing a good amount of this Elise Flex and doing very well with it. But from this spot, what would if we were to commit, like going back to the secretary problem, I'm out of gold here. I don't want to be holding so much gold ideally on my bench. What is the board that we can pivot into? So if you want to do that exercise, you can pause for a second. But this is the solution that I came up with. Because I have the Renekton, the Aurora, I have the Renekton, and I already have a Mord too. So, and I have Leona and Chop here, right? I'm just missing this Sedge. This Sedge could be, ideally, it's this because I have a 3 Exo tank item. But I pretty much have all of these units. I have a Xayah here, Aurora. I can move the AD items over to Xayah, and that would give me a ton of gold to roll down further. Or if I feel like I'm stable, then I can sit and go 9 because even if I'm taking losses, if I'm not taking bad losses, I have enough HP here where I can push 9. Instead, in this game, I was trying to hard force strat amp. I was committed too early to that line, even though in this game, I was actually contested by 2 other players for strat amp. Whereas this line, I was only contested by Malala. And I think if I had even played, just like sold out of this board and played this board here, I suspect I maybe could have beat Malala in this specific matchup. Instead, I ended up playing towards a Street Demon board. Itemization wasn't ideal because of this blue buff. I just happened to hit a Nico 2 on my roll down, and so I was still trying to flex strat amp. I ended up, I think, 5th in this lobby, very close to a 4th, but I suspect I would have been able to do better if I had gone the Dynamo Flex line through transitioning through this board. Because again, if we view Elise 2 as a 4 cost, I just need to hit a front line, and I already had the Mord 2. Like, I think I would have been quite stable here. I did talk about through all these augments. I don't think I mentioned dual Q. That was the augment that I picked in this game, which gave me the Aurora and the Renekton. Because in the ideal capped out board, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 costs. You just have so many outs for dual Q, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8. You're basically using half the 5 costs that exist in the game. So when you play dual Q, like, your odds of hitting at least one of these is extremely high. Plus, we already talked about you can always use more items in this comp because it caps out so high. All right, so that covers Dynamo Flex. I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, feedback in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.